I think that it is appropriate that people paid so much attention to President Gorbachev's presence, because without his presence, Green Cross would never have been convened. And so we all share in a deep sense of gratitude for his leadership, and we all sense a profound sense of gratitude for all the people in Green Cross who've helped make it grow. What I like particularly about Green Cross is its integrated approach to the core problems, the core existential problems that humanity faces today, and that's part of the subject matter of this next panel. There's a set of global public common goals and goods which must be achieved. They include water, ending terrorism, preventing pandemics, obtaining cybersecurity, stable financial markets. These are all very important. But there are a set of critical imperatives, existential imperatives for civilization to continue that require global cooperation. They would include the elimination of nuclear weapons, a stable climate, protecting the oceans and the rainforests. So that which had been a moral imperative that the human family see itself as one, that the wise since time immemorial have advised us, that our hearts should see all human beings as part of our family, has now become a practical necessity. And one of the first world leaders to act on that necessity and to change the world because of that moral and practical insight that allows us to live in a world that has the potential to not be divided and to be in unity. The potential to do that is President Gorbachev. And for that we thank him. I now have the privilege of introducing another world leader who was instrumental in advancing a culture of peace in the world, the former Director General of UNESCO, Federico. But I want to ask that time is so dear and none of these panelists need your accolades, so I would ask that applause be held until the end of the panel. If we deserve it, give it to us then. Dr. Mayer?
Thank you very much. Of course, I am delighted to be here close to Mikhail Gorbachev, because it has been my inspiration during so many years, and he has been the person at the very beginning of radical change in the world. Then I would like to join my congratulations to this wonderful starting of the speech by Jonathan Granoff. And I will start with a quotation of Mikhail Gorbachev. The air dialogues are not intended as a mere talk shop, but as a dynamic and highly interactive forum that brings together not just world leaders and captains of industry, but also the actors who really count, members of civil society. The dialogue's main focus is the identification of concrete strategies which are needed to operationalize the new global agenda for peace and sustainability. I would like, of this quotation of Mikhail Gorbachev, to underline two things. One, members of civil society. We are at this moment, for the first time in history, most of the humanity now is becoming progressively visible, because we must realize that we are talking always about humanity, and we have had throughout the history only a male absolute power, with all the power, with all the women and the rest of the men, and these very few persons, they have had all power, and we have even giving to them our own life. Therefore now, for the first time, we realize that we can start not be anonymous, not be spectators, not be obedient, not be silent, but be finally full citizens. And it's for this that I like to say, as he says, members of civil society. And second, we need now concrete, as he says, concrete strategies, concrete solution. We were talking with today with Garry Jacobs, and we were talking about, we have a lot of diagnosis now, but I am a molecular pathologist, and I know what really matters if we have a good diagnosis is to have good treatment and timely treatment. And therefore we need, as it has been already emphasized today, we need now concrete proposals. My dear friend, this difference that today gives us hope is because, number one, we have now a global consciousness. This means that we can compare. This means that we know what we have, but we know also all the needs of the others. For the first time, we have a global consciousness. We are citizens of the world for the first time. Second, for the first time, from 2 decades ago, we can express ourselves. Before, we were always under fear, silent, obedient. Now for the first time we can say what we like. And this means that with the technologies of communication information, for the first time we can have this normal referendum of the world. We can know the views and opinions and the feelings and the thoughts of so many people. And number three, very important, I remember in 1996, one day in Pretoria with President Nelson Mandela, he told me there will be no culture of peace, there will not be this radical change from power, force, to word, to conversation, to dialogue, to conciliation, without more women in the decision making. The women in the decision making has been really very poor percentage. In 1996, in UNESCO I made one study and was less than 5%. With this percentage of women contribution to sustainability and to peace, it's very impossible to go ahead. But now this is also growing. Therefore, we have three conditions today to start, to end silence, to end obedience, and to be full citizens. And we can imagine the mobilization. This is what President Gorbachev was telling us, the mobilization of the civil society. And this mobilization, in the forefront of this mobilization, we, the intellectuals, the scientists, the artists, all those that have creative activities, we must be in the forefront. We cannot only be witnesses of what happens, spectators, passive spectators. Now we must react. And I would like to end telling you that for this, the first thing is to put again in our mind, for our everyday behavior, these principles, ethical principles that we have changed in a very bad day during the decade of the 80s by the market laws. And to say no to the plutocratic groups. How can we accept, we, the people of the world, we the peoples as it is said in the Charter of the United Nations, how we can accept to be led by the G6, the G7, the G8, the G20, 8 or 20 richest countries of the world, making the governance for a humanity that has at this moment 196 countries. This is the first thing that we must now change, and we must say no at the worldwide level. And we must say that we want again to have the democratic principles to guide our action every day, and we want to be educated, and to be educated means to be free and means to be responsible, as it is said in the UNESCO's constitution. What we need a new paradigm. Garry Jacobs will tell you about this. I think that is extremely important. What we need is to invent the future. the present trends are very clear. We have every day $4 billion in armament and military expenditures. And at the same time, we have more than 60,000 persons dying of hunger. This is intolerable. And this is the result of the present governance. Therefore, what we must do is to invent the future. Can we invent the future? I remember in 1963, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy said, I am told that peace is not feasible. I will demonstrate that it is feasible. I am told that disarmament is not feasible. I will demonstrate that it is feasible. And he ended saying, because there is no any challenge that is beyond the human distinctive creativity. We can invent our future, and I think that now for the first time, because of the civil society visibility, we can achieve this very soon. Thank you.
Thank you for applauding. I share in that. I now have the privilege of introducing Garry Jacobs, who is the CEO and chairman of the board of the World Academy of Art and Science. Garry?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yesterday morning's session, I felt inspired, especially listening to President Gorbachev. Today, listening to so many presentations, and especially Federico's, I feel a hope, a real hope for the future. I also feel and sense among many of us a certain frustration, a frustration that arises out of the fact that we know there are things we can do. We know there are things that can be done to address these issues, practical things, but somehow it doesn't seem to be happening, not nearly fast enough and serious enough. We face today a multidimensional crisis. You're all familiar with it. It covers everything from ecology and employment to global security, human security. And the question is, how do we tackle all these issues? I think one of the themes that comes out of our discussions here is that they cannot be tackled in isolation. Any one of these problems, global warming is big enough so we can, or banning nuclear weapons, as Jonathan's worked so hard for, is important enough that to dedicate our lives to even one of these seems to be more than an ambitious cause. But none of them seems to lend itself to resolution in isolation from the others. And I think the reason for that is they all have a common origin. They all have a common basis. They're all based in, if we look at it in an evolutionary sense, where humanity is today. We have not yet moved effectively beyond the nation state, but the problems we're grappling with today are really global in nature. We're still clinging to a concept, a legal concept of national sovereignty, where what we really need is the power, empowerment for humanity to act. So it raises a question, is there really a solution? Not a solution for one thing or another, for energy or CO2, but for all together, because unless we can solve all of them, it's not clear that we've solved any. If we solve the global warming problem by freezing economic development at this level, well, we're going to have a revolution on our hands, a physical, political, social revolution on our hands among all those who are not satisfied where they are. I think there is a solution, and the solution comes from what Federico mentioned is a new paradigm. And the question is, do we know what the new paradigm is? Have we put together all the pieces of the puzzle to say, if we do all of these things, we can meet all the essential objectives, whether it's for peace or economic security or ecological sustainability? And I think that's what, there's still some thinking that needs to be done. We at the World Academy, and in collaboration with Club of Rome and many other organizations that we're seeking to involve, are trying to see whether all the pieces of the puzzle can be put together. When we talk about a paradigm change, it's not enough that we have an answer. It's also necessary that we're convinced there's a way to make that answer effective in practice. Well, if we look historically, there are times when radical change has taken place for one reason or another. It happened somewhat inadvertently 200 years ago, after Thomas Malthus said that humanity reached 1 billion people, the earth is overcrowded, there'll never be enough food for more, and we're in for a crisis. There was a revolution that took place, we call it the Industrial Revolution, which changed all that. And unfortunately, maybe we came to be convinced that technology is the answer to all our problems. In the 1930s, we had a crisis, started in the U.S. and spread from there, of the Great Depression, where we realized technology alone is not the solution. We need another type of revolution. FDR introduced the New Deal. It was a social political revolution to change the values and basis on which government acts. I think today we need an intellectual revolution, and a revolution that really changes how we perceive the sources of power in the world. Intellectually, the paradigm has to be human-centered paradigm, not money-centered or growth-centered. How do we maximize the social welfare and human security of everybody on earth? And when we ask that question, I think the answers become pretty clear. There are answers to that. In doing that, the question is, what will be the driving force? There's a natural tendency that we look to government as the driving force for this, because who's going to change things if it isn't government? Unfortunately, government still largely represents the nation state. Revolutions rarely take place because of governments. Revolutions take place when the people, when the society says that the powers that be and the structures that be are unacceptable, and we are going to change them. And the question is, how do we release the energy of global society, as the energy of people in this room and the inspiration of people in this room has been released, in order to bring about, hopefully, what is a peaceful social evolution. But I'm convinced that if it doesn't happen peacefully, it will happen anyway, because the frustration levels and lack of fulfillment will continue to grow until it does. How do we bring about that evolution? I don't think it's by lining up in front of the seats of power and trying to convince people who, as Federico also mentioned, most of our governments are more plutocracy than democracy today, more representing certain powers and elites in society. I don't see the revolution is going to come from there, as important it is for us to try. So, is there a way that we collectively, global civil society, which is a force that's never existed before as it exists today, especially after the internet, is there a way that we can reach out and release the social energies of global humanity to work for a solution that shows there is an answer? There is an answer to the employment issue, to the food issue, to the ecological issue, to the security issue, but we need a new paradigm that delivers it. Two practical suggestions, and one of them is, I think we need to use the institution of education globally, which has been reserved into the purview of universities. Now education is exploding, and education is spilling out, breaking out of the universities. So what is being taught has a possibility, we have a possibility of changing the paradigm of thought in the world, rather than expecting it to be done through the traditional academic disciplines or by them alone. And I think for that, global civil society and all the organizations in this room have a key role to play. We're calling it a World University Consortium. Not a consortium of universities, but a consortium of thinkers who have solutions and new perspectives that need to be delivered to the world through new media, through new mechanisms. And I think it's also necessary that once we have in place a mechanism for world public education, that we also have a way of getting responses from the global public. And today, the global public is disenfranchised, as the blacks were in my country until very recently, as women were all over the world until very recently. Global humanity has no say. And we need to create those mechanisms where, if not through our national governments, then directly, I'd say through a global human referendum, we can directly poll global public opinion and carry the weight of human opinion on the issues that we're grappling with. Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce Julia Marton-Lefèvre, the Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Just like the young man who represented youth in the earlier panel, I do not intend to represent half of humanity, but thank you, Federico, for reminding us that it is important and it's nice to be on such a gender-balanced panel. IUCN was created in 1948, and it has a vision with which I feel quite comfortable waking up every morning after only a few hours of sleep, and that is a just world that values and conserves nature. We're not only about nature there, human beings here, but nature and human beings living in harmony. That's a challenge with 7 billion of us going on to 9 billion. I want to also say something personal. My job before having this amazing job was to be the rector of the University for Peace. And many of my colleagues asked me, why are you leaving the science and environmental world to go there? It was for two reasons mentioned by the two previous speakers. First of all, Federico, you're absolutely right. Without education, it's not going to work. The movement that we're looking after, it's not going to work. And the second thing is, Garry, you're right. We're so comfortable in our silos. And so the science and environment world that I grew up in had no idea of what the peace and security world was doing. And by going to that university, I tried to bridge the gap. After all, when the environmentalists worry about having clean water in a well, we never used to think about whether it was actually safe for the woman to get to that well and come back alive. So let's get out of those silos. The background document to this meeting very wisely pointed out that the root of the problem, the root is not climate change, loss of biodiversity, and all those problems that we address every day. It's about us, how we behave, and how we can change in order to find the solutions. So indeed, we are often overwhelmed by bad news. And what we need is some hope, some solutions, and of course leadership. And we have one of the greatest leaders of our world here with us, which is a great honor. We're working very hard on the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think that's an important possibility for solutions. I'm a part of a thing called the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We are, however, facing criticism by people who say that we talk to each other, or we only talk to the convinced, and we don't seem to provide a how-to manual to reach that sustainable and peaceful world. And I'd like to add to the title of this panel, actually, building a peaceful, just, and sustainable world. And the just means it's for all of us, not just for a few. So, what are the practical solutions that I would recommend here? It comes from the work of my organization, IUCN, and that is that nature itself provides solutions for a more prosperous, just, peaceful, and sustainable world. Let me give you just some examples to try to convince you. First of all, prosperous, because the richest countries and companies of tomorrow will indeed be the ones who have invested wisely in their natural capital, alongside their financial and social capital, the famous 3 strands of sustainable development. How does nature add to peace? Peaceful because nature is an obvious force of cooperation. Consider, for example, that nearly 60% of the world's population today lives in shared water basins, so river basins, so they have to cooperate if they want to live in peace. The so-called peace parks that build trust and promote cooperation among nations have been growing in all parts of the world, from the Great Lakes region of Africa to the former Iron Curtain boundary in Europe. And of course sustainable because nature is of course our life support system on our planet. Not only the oceans, of course 70%, but the rest of nature is our life support. So we must not take nature for granted, but rather look at the potential of natural infrastructure to provide a steady flow of benefits to us: clean air, clean water, flood and drought protection, climate regulation, and basically our well-being. We cannot take it for granted anymore. We have been working for many years with the TEEB study, the Economics of Ecosystem and Biodiversity. I think the study leader, Pavan Sukhdev, has just arrived in this room. And that study has given us some tools for analyzing how to measure the value of nature. Let me give you just a couple of examples. Money is not everything, of course, but when I quote these figures, people do sit up. For example, we now know that each year forests deliver about $130 billion of direct, tangible benefits to 1.6 billion people of the world's poorest people, more than the total of ODA. 1/3 of Botswana's total wealth comes from natural capital, notably nature-based tourism and mineral resources. 1 in 3 of the 100 major cities in the world depend on fresh water provided by protected areas in their borders. Restoring degraded landscapes around the world that are roughly the size of Mongolia, about 150 million hectares by the year 2020, would inject over $80 billion per year into our economies. Mangroves and coral reefs have proven to be more effective and less expensive than man-made structures to protect against the coast against hurricanes and tsunamis. And we've got lots of figures for this. So what we have to learn is to work with nature rather than against it. So it's time, for me, my major message here is it's time to stop considering nature as expendable and any related expenditure as a write-off. We have to be serious about recognizing nature as a wise investment choice and a prerequisite for a peaceful, just, and sustainable world. Thank you very much.
As a moderator, I'd like to just make one comment that our accounting systems don't account for the cost of the environment. So that it's called an externality, and by virtue of doing that, our accounting is not realistic and accurate. So that the use of the common good, the common resource of the natural world, which is common to humanity and common to all of us, the use of it is not part of the accounting systems. And by virtue of doing that, we are not being realistic. Now, the realists say that this sort of dog-eat-dog world is the real world, when in fact, it is not the real world. The real world is the natural world. And there's no way that we can continue to have a social economic order that demands that nature conform to our dreams, aspirations, and systems. The most basic part of this new paradigm has to be the requirement that we conform to the rules of the natural world, and that our accounting for what we do include that cost. Otherwise, we are fighting against reality, and that's simply a losing battle. I now have the privilege of of introducing someone who really has grasped and grappled with this for years and is an expert in building a peaceful and sustainable world, the chairman of the Munasinghe Institute of Development, Mohan Munasinghe, who has been one of the leading advocates for living in harmony with nature and an economic system that works for everybody. Doctor, please.
Thank you, Chair. First, congratulations and best wishes to Green Cross on its 20th anniversary, and thanks to the founders, especially President Mikhail Gorbachev, for his vision and outstanding leadership. I think the presence of so many outstanding minds in the room here today and throughout the past 3 days is a tribute to what Green Cross has achieved, and even more so, the ideas that have been put forward will provide impetus, and I speak as a member of the board, will provide further impetus for us to move our vision forward. Let me start by just, in a sense, paraphrasing what many of the previous speakers have said, that we face multiple threats, like the ongoing financial economic crisis, the problem of persistent poverty, the resource shortages, and of course climate change, which is the ultimate threat amplifier because it makes all the other problems worse. Now, unfortunately, these problems are synergistic in a bad way, but the stakeholder interests are very divergent. And what we are seeing is lack of coordination, lack of leadership, lack of political will. And I particularly feel that business and civil society in particular have to step up now, because governments alone have shown themselves less and less capable of grappling with these problems. But the idea is not to fight against governments, but to work with them, for civil society and leaders from business to push the governments to do the right thing, because otherwise it will not happen. And we need, as previous speakers have said, integrated solutions which do not look at problems piecemeal, because in the process of solving one problem, you can make the other problem worse. And we have to deploy our resources much more effectively. If you know, in the recent financial crisis, the leaders of the world found over $6 trillion in very short order, mainly to bail out banks and so on. Of course, banks do need bailing out. But consider that for the problem of poverty, which involves between 1 to 2 billion people, we are spending just 100 billion a year, which is 1/60th that amount. And for something like climate change, just a few $1 billion. It's pocket change. Not to mention $2 trillion on worldwide arms expenditures every year, and much more effort and decision-making, time spent on whether to fight a war or not, rather than to solve the problems of poverty and environment. Let me just summarize a focus on a specific problem among all of these, which has actually caught my attention for the last 5 years. One is the concept that from ecological point of view, we are using more than the capacity of the planet Earth, in fact 50% more than the reusable, sustainable capacity of the planet, and it's surely going to be 2 Earths worth within the next 10 years. Now, of that consumption that is taking place, 85% is done by the 20 percentile of the richest people in the world. So in other words, the rich of the planet are consuming more than one planet's worth. At the same time, I've gone to many meetings where we are promising the poor, between 1 and 2 billion people, yes, we are going to raise you out of poverty. So my question is, if the rich are consuming more than a planet's worth, where are the resources to pull the poor out of poverty? So basically, we have to focus not on the surface level problems, but on the drivers. And among the drivers, there are 4 which I consider very important. One is consumption and the patterns of consumption. Second is production and the technology of production. Third, of course, is governance, which is mainly characterized today by misgovernance. And the fourth, of course, is population. Now, let me say a few more words about how the world has evolved up to now before I come to the closing point about consumption and production. You see, instead of a sustainable development triangle of the economic, the social, and the environmental imbalance, we are living in a manifestly unsustainable way. We have values which are driven by greed and violence and other things, which have, from the social perspective, which have created an economic model of maldevelopment, which is based mainly on debt. If you recall, our grandparents saved so that their investment could make us, allow us to live better today. But we have learned a different truth. We have learned to borrow. So instead of saving, we are borrowing from our grandchildren in order to live even better today. But they will have to pay the price. And so the economic maldevelopment has led to this problem of environmental debt, which previous speakers have, which is not recognized either in the accounting systems or in the forward thinking of the people. And the lack of resources is, of course, leading to more conflict and more social values which are distorted. So we have to break this. And I feel that we need to transcend or break the boundaries within people's minds, particularly the value systems, particularly with young people. Replace unsustainable values with ethical and moral ideas so that greed and selfishness, which are manifestly unsustainable, have no place. Respect for other human beings and nature. And in particular, we have to have business and civil society working together with government, and particularly Green Cross and other organizations can play a key role. So let me end with this vision. I think socially, we need to meet the basic needs of all human beings, and particularly the consumption needs, energy, food, and water, and so on, ensuring peace and harmony and social justice. From the environment perspective, we need to respect nature and reduce humanity's global ecological footprint to less than one planet Earth. We have a hard task to do that because we are already exceeding it. And thirdly, from the economic perspective, and knowing that there are billions of poor people, we cannot neglect the economy. We must build a sustainable economy which is prosperous and resource efficient, but also respects critical environmental and social sustainability constraints. I believe that such a world is possible, but we are very close to the edge of a cliff. Change will come. Either we will fall off and hundreds of millions will die, and we will make a grand correction, or if we are wise enough, we will stop at the edge of the cliff and start to move back. Let us see if we have enough time to do this. So let me end by giving you a mildly optimistic message, and that is basically that although the problems are complex and serious and imminent, I think we know enough to start making development sustainable today, which means basically you and I empowered. When we leave the room, we switch off the light. If we see a tap running, we close it. If we can plant a tree. So let us not wait for leaders to tell us what to do, and particularly to lead us into war, which we don't want. We need to empower, as I said, civil society and business to work with governments. And I think Green Cross in particular, working with our partners, can build the sustainable development models for the 21st century. Let me end with one small quote from an ancient Pali verse in Sri Lanka. It's many hundreds of years old. It says, "May the rains come in time, may the harvest be bountiful, may the people be happy and contented, may the king be righteous." Notice there was the environment, there was the economy, there was society. So many hundreds of years ago, they knew about the Sustainable Development Triangle. We're just trying to reinvent the wheel today. Thank you very much indeed.
Doctor, you pointed out another implicit element in the new paradigm, which is making a distinction between growth and development. And I was thinking that, for the first 19 years of our life, growth and development are pretty much coterminous. But if we continue to grow for the rest of our lives, we end up with a problem of obesity and ill health. So after around 19, you want to stop growing and start developing. So it's the same thing with our economic order. At a certain point, we've grown to provide sufficient housing and sufficient food, but we keep saying we need to keep growing instead of talking about developing our human qualities, developing our values. I was reminded of this Eskimo elder who spoke at the Millennium Peace Summit when the religious leaders of the world came together at the UN, who said, "My brothers and sisters from the South, you've developed a technology that can melt the polar ice cap. When will you develop a technology that can melt the human heart?" And I just remember the whole thing revolves around that little quote. And I had the privilege of having a wonderful discussion with Jane Zhang earlier today, who was telling me that she's been studying William Penn, who was the founder of Pennsylvania, as the great experiment in religious liberty, and I happen to live in Philadelphia. And she was reflecting on the insights of his deep philosophy and the deep philosophy of China. So what a privilege to introduce someone with expertise in governance, economics, and the deep, 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 deep values. She's the Executive Vice President of the China Association for Employment Promotion. Dr. Zhang, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. And first of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Green Cross International for inviting me to this wonderful and very meaningful event. This is my first experience attending your activities, which is really very educational. Thank you very much. I'll be very brief in my sort of presentation, but just now Jonathan has said some very nice words about me, but very little truth in it. I'll be very brief. I'll be making 3 points. If I overuse my time, please give me a signal. We gather here celebrating the 20th anniversary of Green Cross International, when the world stands at a critical moment in development. Humanity is faced with severe challenges and risks: resource depletion, pollution and the carbon emission, rampant economic breakdown, environmental devastation, a long list, just to mention a few. The benefits of development are not shared equitably, and the gap between rich and poor within and between countries is widening. Disparities and dissatisfaction are growing. It is evident our world is far from peaceful and sustainable. Much has been said about the adverse impact and the serious consequences of the way human has lived, produced, and consumed. Here I will just say a few words, add a few more words about the challenges, our challenges in the social aspect, especially in employment. According to the ILO report, the global unemployment levels have exceeded 200 million. Almost 1 in 3 workers living in working poverty. 1.1 billion people have no access to essential social security. Income gap is widening, and the costs are rising. According to one statistic, the richest 0.5 of the world's population holds 38.5% of the total wealth, while the rest 67% of the population owed only just a little bit more than 3%. We can see the social inequalities and the gaps. And youth employment is an even more serious challenge, with some countries' youth unemployment rate reaching over 30% or even much higher. Inequality and injustice is visibly on the rise. Social coherence has been further weakened and instability increased, as we already see in a number of countries. Obviously, to address these challenges, we need a change. Not a piecemeal change, but a transformational one. A change of direction. It's time that we made a decisive turn away from the current dominant economic growth model. That's an option, not a necessity. To this end, we need, first of all, to change the way we think, the way we act. We have to change our mindset, our behavior. We must decide to work more closely, work in solidarity, and break a new path for a fairer, greener, and more sustainable future, not only for ourselves, but for the generations to come. Achieving environmental sustainability and turning the vision of decent work for all into a reality have been identified as two of the defining challenges for the 21st century. As closely interrelated pillars of sustainable development, they should be addressed inseparably. In fact, the transition to a sustainable economic development and environmental sustainability should and can be a process of promoting social justice and social inclusion. It can be an important driver of growth and can generate more and better jobs, green jobs, and enhance poverty reduction. The role of the world of work in this process is crucial. For everyone, men and women, to have a decent work, to have an access to decent work, and enjoy decent life, equality, and social justice in a sustainable environment is what a peaceful and sustainable world is all about. Point 2. Given the enormity and nature of these challenges, sectoral or local solutions are far from sufficient to provide the right answers needed. To tackle the multifaceted shared challenges, we need to take an integrated and holistic approach, both at the international and national levels, with active participation of all the stakeholders, government, business, and civil society. The international community need to build a much stronger consensus and make a much stronger commitment to effective action. Here, hence, there is all the more an urgent need to reinvent multilateral collaboration and coordination. In this area, we too need a change. We are used to working in a compartmentalized manner. We are not quite used to working together. We need to forge much stronger partnerships and make concerted efforts to address the systemic, intertwined, and complex global challenges. One word about culture in this process. In this process, culture has a very important role to play. There is a very strong and practical need for us to nurture and strengthen and promote a culture of respect for nature. and also a culture of harmony. Harmony between nature and humanity, harmony among human beings ourselves. It's a culture of peace. There is a Chinese saying goes, I don't know how many of you understand Chinese, but I would like to say, 和气生财, harmony builds prosperity. Let's work together also to promote and nurture a culture of respect for nature, a culture of harmony, a culture of peace. Point 3. While building a broad and strong consensus on multilateral collaboration in tackling sustainability challenges, it is also a must to strengthen policies and actions at the national and local level. International consensus and international commitments, even very strong political commitments to effective action, must be translated into national policies and actions. And national policies should be formulated by taking full account of the specific national ecological, environmental, economic, social situation into consideration. Policies and actions at the two levels complement each other, reinforce each other. They must go hand in hand. As the saying goes, which we are all familiar with, think globally and act locally. I think now at this important forum, we can also add one dimension into the saying. Think globally, collaborate multilaterally, act locally. When I say this, I have my country, China, in mind. I think national policies and actions are very important also for the international transition to a sustainable development. You know, over the past 3 decades of reform and opening up to the outside world, China has made remarkable achievements in its economic and social development. But also at the same time, we have paid very heavy costs for what has been achieved. With the rapid economic development, which is primarily GDP driven, and also with the accelerated urbanization process, you know, China's urbanization rate reached 51.27% in 2012, and this year it's already now over 52%, with more than 700 million people living and working in the urban area. In this process, many problems have cropped up, such as over-exploitation, overuse of natural resources, rising levels of pollution and emission of greenhouse gases, widening of income gap, and social inequality, employment and social protection issues with regard to the rural migrant workers. That's a very specific problem or challenge China faced with. I won't go into detail, etc., etc. You know, all these problems, if not properly addressed, not only pose huge pressure upon us in China to bear, but also they have adverse implications beyond the border. So over the past few years, yes, there is a growing consensus in China that we came to realize that this economic model we have been following is not sustainable things cannot go on like this. We learned a lesson. So in the 12th five-year plan, the 12th five-year plan set very clearly as key themes or key tasks. First, rebalancing of the economy. Second, address social inequalities. Promote improving people's livelihood. Third, environmental sustainability. So now we have plans have been made to invest $468 billion in greening key economic sectors, in particular in waste, recycling and reutilization, clean technologies and renewable energy. More than 4 million jobs have been created. So you can see the positive linkage between sustainability and job creation. So in the end, I know that time has come up. In the end, I would like to conclude that, in my view, sustainability, a peaceful and a sustainable world, is economically sound, socially inclusive, culturally enriching, environmentally sustainable. Let's work together. We think that China still faced with a lot of challenges, but we think we have taken the right first step on the right track in the direction of smooth, good transition to sustainable development. This not only does good to China, but with positive implications to the world. Let's work together. Thank you for your attention.
One of the blueprints for helping us make this transition is certainly the Earth Charter, and it is a great honor to introduce my friend Mirian, Vilela, who is the executive director of the Earth Charter International Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you, Green Cross, for organizing this and for inviting me to share some thoughts with you today. It's a privilege because I would like to start by, I have heard a lot about collaboration today, throughout the day actually, including this panel. And I think the way in which the Earth Charter initiative was put together is a very interesting example of collaboration. Collaboration among key individual leaders, collaboration governments, individuals, shared vision. And for that kind of collaboration to happen, because we have heard a lot, and I think we all agree we need collaboration in the world to make this happen, we need trust. Last year in the Rio +5, or Rio +20, I was really in the middle of this discussion between green economy being good or not. And I think it was mainly the driving force of that was a lack of trust between North and South, not willing to collaborate around the notion of green economy. Lack of trust, misunderstanding. So I share this because I have seen in a concrete way in the Earth Charter Initiative the collaboration, especially among its founding individuals, Mr. Gorbachev, Mr. Strong, two world leaders that were able to orchestrate a collaboration among many other individuals with a shared vision. For that collaboration to happen, I think we need to take away our own thoughts and to be able to listen to the other, to look to the other, to look to the nature and learn from nature and learn from one another. But we are so busy talking and going one direction that we forget to listen to the surrounding, to feel the surrounding. So in order to be able to collaborate, we need to reconnect ourselves with our inner self and with nature. So the Earth Charter certainly talks about vision, and in its preamble it says we need a shared vision of basic values to provide an ethical foundation for the emerging world community. I'm from Brazil, and I often listen former Senator Marina Silva share her frustration when she was in the cabinet, to say, aren't we members of cabinet, part of the same team? But she often shares that throughout her time, they were fighting among ministers of environment with minister of economy and agriculture. So how can we have a shared vision? How can we build a shared vision if among ministers within the same cabinet don't share a shared vision and cannot collaborate towards this common goal? We need to listen to each other. Yeah, we need to listen to nature to be able to collaborate and to forge this shared vision. A shared vision to give us a direction of where do we want to go, how do we want to go, and what do we mean by a peaceful, sustainable, and just world. What do we mean by that? Julie, I fully agree with you, and I think all of us in this room would agree. We need to have a shared vision. What does that mean, a just, sustainable, and peaceful world? And that's what the Earth Charter has tried to articulate over a process of dialogue and consultation. Shared vision. Shared, but also clear vision. So I use contact lenses, and many of us here use glasses, right? So without my contact lenses, I really don't have a clear vision. So I think we need a shared vision with new glasses, clear glasses that can really show us the way. A clear glasses to show us the systemic vision. We have heard here today the need of systemic thinking, systemic vision. Our friend from China just mentioned the need for integrated approach, which I think is quite similar. The need for sustainable design, sustainable planning, systemic planning. Once we put the glasses of sustainability with the shared vision, I think we'll be able to see the relationship and see bridges among our own areas of interest, bridges among the different world agenda, the peace agenda with the environment agenda, and etc. So we need lenses, clear lenses, new glasses, to see the world through relationships, bridges, systemic approach. Third, collaboration. I'll come back to the issue of collaboration just because I want to stress the need to collaborate not only with one another, but with the large living world, with the nature. But for that, again, we need to listen, to see, to look at each other, to look at nature, to look at mountains, so that we come a bit closer to that. To collaborate, we need to build trust. When I look at Likotal, I see that we have built trust over the past 15, 17 years of working together. And I think this is really a concrete way of doing things in practice. No? We always talk about this vision of the Earth Charter as a theory that gives us direction, a compass, a map that gives us direction to a more just and sustainable world. But also we need to combine that with action, an action with a good direction. I would like to close by stressing again that the Earth Charter does encompass many things that were said here during the day. But I think we can, again, not achieve this vision of a just, sustainable and peaceful world without two ingredients. Of course, coming from an Earth Charter initiative, I should start by saying an ethical framework and values. But given that many people have already said that, I'm going to take two. I have heard education. We need more education. Yes, we need more education, but I think I would like to add that's not any kind of education, because the world is full of people with a lot of education, master degrees and PhDs, but doing a lot of wrong things and making a lot of bad decisions. So what kind of education do we need? We need to reorient our education systems to incorporate these values and ethics of sustainability in a completely new way, in an interdisciplinary way. So yes, we need education, but not any kind or not the same kind of education that we are having, because it's not producing the right kind of leaders. Education that really incorporates a notion of shared vision and ethics for sustainability. And lastly, we need to rescue our capacity to feel, sensibility. We have been working a lot with our minds, with our rational side, which is good, but the human being is beyond this part, the logical part, the words and the arguments, right? We don't necessarily move only by words and arguments. We are driven a lot by what we feel. So we need to rescue our capacity as human beings, which I think it's quite natural of human being to feel, to be sensible, of sensibility. Our capacity to be connected again with the large living world, which means the oceans, yes, which means the mountains, yes. But if we are so far away from them, we are disconnected. So it's very hard to make decisions about the best way to reorient our world if we are disconnected from nature. So according to what the Earthshot articulates, we need a change of minds, but also hearts. And I would like to close with principle 16F of the Earth Charter. Because some people look at the Earth Charter and say, well, is this only about environment? Actually, no. Is this a charter for the environment? No. Is it about sustainability? Actually, I think it articulates a vision that puts together the peace agenda with the environment agenda, with the justice and human rights. And it's one of these last principles articulates the notion of peace as the result of a more just and sustainable world. We can only achieve enduring peace if we're able to address the need for ecological integrity. We can only achieve an enduring peace if we're able to have a more just and sustainable world in our societies. And it ends by saying we need to recognize that peace is the holiness created by the right relationships. The right relationships with what? My relationship with myself, the relationship with oneself, the right relationship with others, with Julia, with my friend Jacobs, with Jonathan, the right relationships with the others, other cultures, other life, Earth with a capital E, for some reason, and the larger whole of which we are all part. So this notion of interconnectedness and systemic approach is right there, also embedded. Thank you very much.
I want to conclude with one of the elements of a sustainable world that we really haven't focused on, which is moving from the law of power to the power of law. And I want to comment on one of the issues that is pressing on the peace and security of the world today, which is the possibility of the use of force without the power of law behind it. If parties in Syria have committed crimes against humanity, crimes are prosecuted by courts and by law. There is an international criminal court. And if you follow the language of the allegations relating to chemical attacks, you'll note that the allegations are essentially criminal allegations. Now, the doctrine of the duty to protect, which is the responsibility to protect, which is a very good principle, is not a principle of punishment for previous wrongdoing. The International Criminal Court is such a process. And the Security Council has the power to refer a matter to the International Criminal Court. The Security Council has done this in the past with Libya, with Darfur, and it could well do this with respect to Syria. Now, some countries say that the perpetrators of crimes against humanity are Al-Qaeda divisions within the rebels. Well then, if they've committed crimes against humanity, let them be prosecuted as well. So, when we talk about the use of force outside of the law, in the long term, this is a terribly dangerous thing to do, even if on its surface it appears morally correct. The fact is, we have a legal system now in the world that would allow for an appropriate prosecution. And it is my hope that that be the course that the world follows. And last, a word that has not been spoken here, that, we don't say it all that much, but we should. Nobody came here to get rich. Nobody came here because of the love of power. People came here because we love being alive. We love the natural world. We love one another. We are the people who want to move from the love of power to the power of love. Let that be our power. Thank you.